Hi, I'm Catherine, Head of Education at the Napa Valley Wine Academy. The words Level 3 exam can strike fear in students. However, when you receive that award certificate post-exam with that accomplishment, it's so empowering. It really helps to know what to expect when it comes to the exam. There's a tasting portion and there's a theory portion to the exam. Both are done when the exam is marked. You will taste two wines, a white wine and a red wine. It will never be a sparkling wine or a fortified wine, but it could be a sweet wine like a Sauterne. You're going to have 20 points for the white wine available, and you'll have 21 marks for the red wine available because you'll be assessing tannin on the red wine. But here's some good news. There's 41 marks then total, but you only need 23 marks in order to pass the tasting exam. Pretty good news, right? Here's some more good news. What they do with the exam is add the scores together. So if you don't do that well on the white wine, let's say, you can make up points on the red wine. They add the points together. So some good news there. Now, there are ways to maximize points on the Level 3 tasting exam. Like, for instance, the aroma descriptors. You have 5 points or marks available for adding tasting, aromas that you find in the wine. But don't just put 5, put 7. That way, when the person goes in to grade the exam and they don't see some of your descriptors, you'll have more options in order to gain maximum points there. And the same goes for on the palate. You'll have 3 points available. So put 5 at least. And look, we get it. Some wines are simple, and you might not be able to pull out different aromas or different tastes, flavors. So here's a trick. Go ahead, and if you're having trouble, but you find lemon, say in a white wine, think about other descriptors that are in that same cluster. What do I mean by cluster? A cluster is a group, like an umbrella name for, say, like citrus fruits. That's a cluster. So any citrus, whether it's lemon, lime, grapefruit, is going to fit under that cluster. So if you found lemon in that wine, go ahead and add, lime, grapefruit, maybe lemon peel, add other things that make sense. So where do you find these clusters? They're on the back of your SAT card. If you can see here, there's green fruit, citrus fruit, stone fruit. Each of these in bold is a cluster. But on the Level 3 exam, you cannot use a cluster name. You can't write, citrus fruit. You have to write an actual citrus fruit, like lemon, lime, or grapefruit. Cheers. Here's how the Level 3 theory exam works. There's 2 parts to it, all in the same booklet. Multiple choice questions and questions that need a short written answer. There's 50 multiple choice questions and 4 questions that need those short written answers. Do know that those 4 questions, though, may have multiple parts, like A, B, C, maybe even a D, but don't worry, they don't all need long answers. Now, the bad news is that you need to pass 55% of each of those sections separately, meaning you need to pass 55% of the 50 multiple choice and 55% of the things that they're looking for in your short written answers. Each of those short written answers are worth 25 points each. So if you don't do well, say, in the short written answers, you can't make up for it, in the multiple choice because they're graded separately. But you will get one total aggregate score for the theory. I know it's a little complicated, but don't worry, you got this. You'll do the multiple choice, and then you'll go ahead and do the short written answer, and you just need 55% of each to pass the whole theory exam. And you'll have 2 hours to complete the whole theory exam. And because they're in the same booklet, you can go back and forth between the multiple choice and the short written answer sections. Here are some tips on the multiple choice part of the Level 3 exam. First, we recommend that you do the multiple choice first. Read through the questions carefully. You can even underline keywords in the booklet itself. And that's because the answer sheet is separate. It'll look like this. So you're going to read the question in the exam booklet, and then you're going to circle in the letter that corresponds to the answer that you think is best. That means that within the exam booklet itself, underline keywords. You can cross out, ooh, I know it's not A, I know it's not B, and then you can decide, okay, is it C or D? So use that exam booklet. Don't worry about it. So do the multiple choice first, and don't take too much time on any one question. You want to get to the next part of the theory exam, right? The questions that need a short written answer. If you are struggling with a certain question, instead of taking a lot of time on it, you could put a light tick next to, like, say, the number, far away from the circles. Put a light tick there, and then you can go back to that after you've answered the questions that need the short written answers if you have time later. Of course, you'll want to erase that. You don't want that any mark to be close so that there's any confusion on what your answer is for the WSET. Here are tips on the short written answer portion of the Level 3 theory exam. First, students ask us all the time, how much do I write? You're going to hate this quick answer. It depends. Don't worry, I'm going to explain. I'm going to explain that. When you're asked to, say, name something or identify or list, that means they're just asking for a factual recall. Like, you can just give, like, say they say identify the key grapes in X region. Then you can just write what those grapes are. So identify, name, list, just give the facts. If the question asks you to describe something, that means you're actually going to write a sentence or several sentences. That's because if you're describing something, you still probably want to identify, or tell them about the key terms in their question. Like, say you have a question about describing the style characteristics of white Zinfandel. It would be great to tell them, white Zinfandel is a rosé wine made from the red grape Zinfandel. So you're using sentences to still tell them about the key terms. Look, what it really comes down to is you pretend the WSET doesn't know anything. That's fun. And then you're teaching it to them. So if you're teaching in a class about white Zinfandel, it makes sense that you might want to explain to the students or to describe to the students what that means, what it is, before you then tell more about the style. Now, finally, the WSET for the Level 3 really wants you to start explaining things. And this is really when you're super teaching them. So you want a paragraph, or more. So this, you want to write a longer answer. Now, the way they ask you to explain, sometimes they'll say explain, like explain how, or explain why. But sometimes they might just say how or why. And so you're going to want to take numerous sentences to not only identify key terms and then maybe describe something, and then with the explanation, what they're really looking for you to do is to make connections between influences and, say, the final style of a wine. So you want to think about using connector verbs. Here's what I mean by that. If, say, you've studied that the climate in Chablis is cool continental, and therefore the wines happen to have high acidity. They're looking for you to say those things, make the connection between the climate and that high acidity in the wine. So you're using words like, and therefore, or because, those words that say you're connecting two pieces of information. So you could say, the climate is cool continental and therefore the acidity is high, or the acidity is high in Chablis because there is a cool continental climate. So anyway, using those connector words when it comes to these explain questions can be really helpful. But don't worry, your school can give you a lot more tips. And in fact, we will go ahead and do a separate session on this in the future. So what separates a pass from merit or distinction? Words that you'll see on your final exam results. There are actually 5 levels of grading: distinction, merit, pass, fail, and fail unclassified. While it may be painful to get a fail unclassified or fail, don't worry, you can retake the exam as many times as you would like in order to achieve a pass. And here's some good news. If you pass one portion of the theory exam, say you pass the tasting or the theory but not the other part, you only have to retake either the tasting or the whole theory, whichever one you didn't pass. So that's really good news. Now, just remember, the theory comprises both the multiple choice and the questions that require a short written answer. So those you need to pass together. Each, you need to get 55% in each. However, it's one final grade. So you can't just retake the multiple choice or the short written answer portion of the theory exam. You do need to take the entire theory exam if you don't pass it, but if you pass the tasting, you don't need to take that again. When it comes to the exams, we know there's a lot to swallow. However, it's wine, so we love swallowing. Well, that's a lot to swallow, and then no swallowing jokes. We know when it comes to WSET exams, there's a lot to swallow. However, don't worry. Your school is behind you and will help you every step of the way.